getting crazier for the New York Rangers as we have a ton of stuff to go over today from Jordan Kyrou. We're going to get to that later in the live stream. We have some updates about some Rangers players and the defense in particular. Had a video on that earlier today as well, but we're going to deep dive into that. And the overarching theme of today is going to be mostly the Rangers are going to be a better team next year, and I think that's an exciting thing. So we're going to dive into all of that and more in this live stream. Welcome in, everyone. I already see a couple of people commenting, so thank you, Ryan. This is my favorite channel as well. we love making content for you guys, so love to see all you guys. I'm sure we'll see some regulars in the chat as time goes on here, but lots to get to today. Bret, first of all, how you doing, and what do you make of everything that's happened with the Rangers so far? We've had a lot of fallout about the K'Andre Miller stuff. I think we're getting a pretty good sense of who's going to be on the defensive core this year and what the pairings are going to be. So, and I know you talked about that a little bit in your last video as well. So how we feeling about the Rangers so far this week? Lots to get to, but how we feeling?
Well, first off, Darius, I'm doing well, and we spoke off air. I'm glad to hear you're doing well as well. Had a little time off yesterday for the first time in what feels like a few years for you.
It's been busy.
Darius.
Been busy with the Rangers.
But as we spoke about, didn't do anything too exciting, but it's good that you got a little time just to, relax a little. And now we're back here for our weekly Wednesday live stream. That's what we're calling it, the weekly Wednesday live stream. And really excited. We see some familiar faces, obviously. We're sure that, we'll be talking here probably for about 45 minutes or so. And I'm sure a lot of you will also join in and join the conversation with us. And, things were a little bit slow. We had a little bit of chaos going on during the draft, during the free agency period. And now it's that point in the offseason where, the good teams that are planning on really making some noise here, there's still moves that have to be made. There's still marginal areas where, teams like the Rangers can improve. The Eastern Conference is open, in my opinion. I've spoken about the Western Conference is loaded. I think the Rangers can really, do some damage here in the East. They're not too far removed from being a real contender. What we saw last year could be an outlier. The Rangers are projected to be a better team this year. We all expect them to be a better team. And a lot to talk about here today because, when we do our live streams, it's almost like, Vince Bricagliano, Friedman, all these guys, they know we're live streaming, guys. They know we're live streaming every Wednesday at 5 o'clock, and they give us something to talk about here.
Yeah, I wonder if Vince is like, hey, I know they're live streaming on Wednesday here. I'm going to drop a bomb every Wednesday for whatever reason. It seems like he always does that, but appreciate Vince's work as always. But thank you for tuning in, everyone. We're going to dive into things here. Lots to talk about in terms of like prospects and all of that as well, because that's been a hot topic too. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Shout out Black Thunder. What's up, boys? And Mike, nice to see you as well. Been watching the Rangers since 1975, and he's enjoying the channel. So thank you so much. Not possible without you guys watching and liking and everything like that. So thank you so much, everybody. But we'll get to some stuff. If you guys want to throw some questions out there in the chat as well, we'll definitely get to those. But I want to start with this, Bret. Something pretty interesting. Byron had some prospect rankings, and you see these prospect rankings every year, every summer. It's about that time. And of course, the New York Rangers were ranked 23rd out of 32 teams. And I think I have a little bit of a problem with this. I'm curious for your thoughts as well, because they named, first of all, the top 5 skater prospects for the New York Rangers as Gabe Perreault, Scott Morrow, which I do agree with, obviously Spence, who they just drafted, Brendan Othman, who I wouldn't classify as a prospect anymore. I'll get into that in a second, and Brandon Brisson, who they just re-signed as well. To me personally, I understand why Brendan Othman would still be considered a prospect, but if you've played NHL games and you're, playing every day in the AHL and you're not, under 22 anymore or 21 years old, I wouldn't necessarily classify you as a prospect, especially if you have like a handful of NHL games under your belt. So to me, I don't know why Brendan Othman's there, but what's your take on this? I'm curious because, of course, Scott Morrow coming in, like, he is a prospect, and I think that he's only played a handful of NHL games, especially in the playoffs. And I would classify him at least as a prospect for the Rangers because he could really end up anywhere at this point in time. I do think that he could end up in the NHL. But, how do you feel about this ranking? Because I feel like they're a little too low, at least I understand the development thing, but I feel like they're too low for some of the names on this list.
Yeah, well, ultimately, I understand your frustration, Darius. Still low on the lower end of these rankings here. Not getting too much love here from Byron, but nevertheless, they went from 31 out of 32. That's really, really bad. I mean, being the 31st, I mean, it's not quite the worst, but it's the second worst, which is not anything to celebrate.
Yep.
So going from 31 to 23, is great. I think it's a great thing for the Rangers. You gotta walk before you can run here. And I didn't expect the Rangers to go from 31, to 11 overnight, something
Yep.
like that. And what's good about this is that, the Rangers are one of those teams. It feels like they've been one of these teams for a while where, they always seem to have a chance, whether they're the favorites or not, they always seem to have a chance and be in the mix to where it's also frustrating as well because you kind of hate to be in the middle. You don't know if you're rebuilding, you don't know if you're going for it all the way. But the Rangers certainly have the pieces, like I alluded to earlier in this stream, to make some noise. The East is open. I understand Florida is the standard, but Rangers had a little bit of success against Florida, and we'll get into that later on in the video, whether it's Igor Shesterkin against the Panthers, whether it's Alexei Lafreniere and the way he seems to step up when he plays against the Florida Panthers. This is a Rangers team that, went 6 games against the back-to-back champions and looked really good in those first 3 games. Didn't play as well down the stretch throughout that series, but the Rangers are in a spot here where they have enough to contend and they're moving up the prospect ladder, which is good to see. You don't want to be stuck in the middle, but it's hard to, rebuild this whole thing overnight. So Chris Drury's taken some steps this offseason to put us in a position where we can be competitive, but also have a future of sustained winning in our trajectory.
And of course, they have to continue to actually develop these players. Let's not, put that aside. Of course, they have to continue to do that. But you make a good point that, they're not going to rebuild overnight. And I don't think the point of, next season or even the next couple seasons is to rebuild. You still have some really, really good pieces on the team. It's not like you need to go scorched earth or anything like that because of last year. It was just a bad mix. And, learning from some mistakes that I actually want to get to later in the stream. So stay tuned for that and how they're conducting business this offseason. That's a little bit different from last offseason. So I want to get into specifics on that. But some great prospects. I do want to acknowledge something that a couple people are talking about in the chat, like Mike. Yes, they did announce today about an hour ago that Kenny Albert, we kind of knew already that he was going to be the play-by-play guy, the new play-by-play of the New York Rangers. But Dave Maloney is taking over as the color analyst now. So that's a strong team. Let me just start with that. That is fantastic for Rangers fans because nobody's going to ever step into the shoes of Sam Rosen. But if somebody's going to do that, Kenny Albert is the guy. I'm glad that he's the guy, and the games are going to sound good. So I'm really happy about that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that they did announce that today. Today it is Dave Maloney. And I will say, Mike, I do like Ryan Callahan on color as well. I think he did it a couple times. So good player and not bad on color commentary. So it should be interesting. But I think we should move on a little bit. And again, if you have any other questions in the chat, throw them out. We'll be answering stuff for the next about an hour. We'll be live for roughly an hour here. But the St. Louis Blues, there's a lot going on with the St. Louis Blues and Jordan Kyrou. And I wanted to throw this out here because NYR Louis just kind of threw it out there that, there's a lot of smoke around Jordan Kyrou right now. And of course, he has a no movement clause. He would have to waive to go to another team. It kicked in on July 1st. I'll just throw it to you right away, Bret. Would you even want Jordan Kyrou on this team? We've been talking a lot, and you've been very vocal about it. The right wing on this team is not great. Like, as it stands, of course, Mika isn't even, penciled into the right wing right now. He probably should be, but anyway, we can talk about that later. But, how do you feel about the right wing, Jordan Kyrou? Does that excite you at all? And again, we'll get into the specifics of it. I don't think, I don't know if it's very likely that he becomes a Ranger because of his contract, but do you like Jordan Kyrou? Would it be a fit?
Well, do I like Jordan Kyrou? Yes. Would it excite me? Absolutely. Is it going to happen? No. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. Look, the Rangers still need to be proactive here. When a player like this, I know Montreal's the favorite here, but the Rangers need to do their due diligence. When a player like this seems to be available, you can't you have to kick the can. You can't just sit there and not make that phone call. And we know Chris Drury probably will make that phone call. He's a guy that's aggressive, especially if he likes Kyrou. We know how Chris Drury operates. If he really likes Kyrou, I know the Rangers have less than $1 million to work with here, but if he really likes a player, he'll do his best and he'll be urgent and
Yep.
he'll be very aggressive in trying to do whatever he can to make that happen. The problem is that the Rangers have a lot of players here that would also need to waive no trade clauses. The Mika Zibanejads, the Artemi Panarins, players like that. So it's really difficult. You can't just create this cap space overnight.
Right.
It has to be a lot of finessing, a lot of conversations, and but Kyrou would be a terrific fit because he would play the role that Mika Zibanejad is supposed to play. He's a much younger version of Mika Zibanejad. He plays on the right wing. I want to see Mika Zibanejad play on the right wing. I think he was very effective there
I agree.
last season. I would like to see that. But Kyrou is just natural. He'll be natural on that right wing. He's basically, a 30-plus goal scorer the last 4 seasons. I mean, he's coming off a terrific, terrific season. He was a plus 23 when he was on the ice. I mean, he was just causing chaos. The Rangers need that. The Rangers need guys that are going to cause chaos, that are still in their prime, 27 years old. The speed is off the charts, really off the charts, making $8 million. Like I said, if the Rangers could magically move Mika Zibanejad and just replace that contract with Kyrou, it'd be a tremendous W. I just don't see it happening, unless
Yeah.
the Rangers and Mika, I know they've been having these conversations the entire offseason. If things were to really, go awry and maybe, Chris Drury says something that really turns Mika Zibanejad off and really leaves a sour taste in his mouth, even more than the Chris Kreider trade, then we could see something like this happening. But until then, it's unlikely. But, as we say, Darius, until pen is to paper, until Elliot Friedman comes out with the breaking news, anything is possible. The player is available, that's for certain.
Yeah, he is available, and it sounds like the St. Louis Blues wouldn't be opposed to keeping him, first of all, for the duration of his contract, but he does make $8.1 million. They do have a replacement there in Snuggerud as well, so it could be interesting. Of course, Montreal is at the forefront of all of this, and he did say that he would waive his no movement clause to go to Montreal, and there were talks. They just made a trade, those two teams, but could make some sense for the New York Rangers. But again, it would be tough to make it work under the salary cap. Chris Drury, if he really wanted to make it work, he would. We've talked about that a lot. Like you said, when he fixates on a player and he really wants him, he's gonna get him. That's just the fact of the matter. So, but if you look at the right side there, like you mentioned, right now it's not pictured that way. And again, this is from Puckpedia. We don't know how the lines are going to shape up when the season starts, but Zibanejad should be on the right wing. I mean, him and Miller together, like Zibanejad was one of the best players, I'm not even joking, like statistically in the entire league for a month when they were playing together on each other's lines. So I think that could make some sense. Again, I'm not sure who plays third line center then at that point. That's something we would have to, dissect as we get closer to the season. Perreault I would imagine, unless he comes out like shot out of a cannon in training camp, is probably going to start the year in the AHL, and that's totally fine. I can see him finding his footing and then, maybe being called up as the season goes on. So I don't see an issue with that. One other guy, though, I mean, in talking about Jordan Kyrou, $8.1 million and some change, right? But, he does offer roughly 70 points, a season. 7 points would be disastrous for that cap hit. But if he, if he does offer 70 points. But another player that does offer the same type of point production and actually had a career year last year is Rickard Rakell. I don't have anything prepped on it, but somebody did mention it in the chat. I think it's Raj did mention in the chat that what about Rickard Rakell from the Pittsburgh Penguins? He makes $5 million. He has, I believe, 3 years left on his contract, which is far less and more affordable than a Jordan Kyrou. That could be attractive for the New York Rangers, where then maybe if you absolutely have to keep Mika Zibanejad, or maybe you do move off Mika Zibanejad to free up some cap, you have Rakell on your second line right wing. Now this is really looking like a dangerous team with some offensive punch. So Rakell could make some sense. I don't know if you have any thoughts on Rakell. He's a cheaper, I don't want to say he's exactly like Kyrou. Kyrou, also keep in mind, is much younger, right? Rakell is 32 years old. He's going to be 33. But Rakell makes less for less years, which could be attractive for the Rangers. And we know, last year, career year on a bad Pittsburgh Penguins team, if he's playing with a guy like JT Miller, let's say on the right wing, he could be feeding him all day long. So how do you feel about maybe a Rickard Rakell versus maybe Jordan Kyrou?
Yeah, Rickard Rakell. And who was that mentioned that in the chat?
I believe it was Raj. I'm
Raj,
go back
I'm glad Raj is, that's great to see, like being proactive, thinking of some other replacements, other than a Jordan Kyrou, which may seem unrealistic because, Raj, the Rangers do need some help at right wing. And I'm glad you noticed that as well because, the way we're looking at it right now, it's not enough in my mind to be taken truly seriously. If you bring in Raquel, I would understand it. I mean, this is a player that just put up 70 points, like you mentioned. He was
Yep.
durable this season, is 32 years old. And if we look at this Rangers lineup via Puckpedia,
Yep.
there's a lot of 30 plus year old players on this team. And
Yes, sir.
I understand the Rangers, want to win this year, and they're not rebuilding. They're what we like to call retooling. I would just like to see them retool with some younger players. I get the attraction when it comes to Raquel. It's a player that would be more affordable if you were to move a Carson Soucy, for instance. Which we'll talk about later on as well. You'd automatically bring yourself in over $4 million. Like I said, the Rangers have a little less than $1 million. If you add Carson Soucy's cap hit and you take that away, you'd have over $4 million to play with, and you can make, the Raquel move happen.
Hmm.
Like I said, 70 points, nothing wrong with that. That is some great numbers, great production, would be great for the Rangers. I don't love the age, Darius. I don't love the age. I don't love the not enough consistency for me, to be honest with you. When it comes to Kyrou, we see this year in and year out. We see a player that's in the middle of his prime. And when it comes to Raquel, we see a kind of, good year, bad year, good
Yep.
year, bad year. And he's coming off a great year. So does that mean he's due for a bad year? That's the problem. Too many question marks. But I love the comment from Raj right there. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Ricardo Raquel could make some sense in terms of his contract's up a little bit sooner. He is getting older, but you bring up a good point. Like maybe you want to start looking at getting younger while still maintaining, skill, right? I think it's very difficult to win the Stanley Cup in this league if you're a young team, but you can't get older just for the sake of that, right? If you're the Rangers, so could make some sense. The advanced analytics on Kyrou as well, very very good. 30 plus goal pace, only 27 years old, so something you could take a look at, but you would have to move a lot of money around, so it would be very difficult. Not a lot of money, actually. If you wanted to talk to Mika Zibanejad, which is our next topic on the docket here, that if you move off, $8.5 million, now we're really talking. But from Elliot Friedman in his last 32 Thoughts podcast of the season, very upsetting because I do enjoy all of Friedman's insight and reporting, because usually when Friedman does actually end up reporting or saying something, there is a little bit of smoke that does end up happening. So do appreciate that from him, but there's a lot thrown out there sometimes too. But anyway, he said it's very clear that the Rangers are working with Mika Zibanejad. They're trying to figure out a way to make it work. Now, I think that's interesting in of itself. We'll break that down in a second. But he went on to say, you never know if it'll continue, but the bottom line is the season is not starting the way the last two did, and he is basically alluding to that there's a lot of trade noise around him. There's a lot of chatter. It's not going to be very comfortable for him to start this season. I don't know if that's by design. Maybe it is, but not too sure about that. But I thought it was very interesting that he didn't straight up say they're trying, like he said, they're trying to work with Mika Zibanejad, not necessarily trade him or move off of him, but like, where does he play? Do you want to stay on the team? Are you going to play on the wing? Like, it feels like they're trying to figure that out because he doesn't want to leave, and it's in his contract. I don't blame the guy. He earned the right? He signed the contract, pen to paper. He has the no movement clause. It is what it is. We've seen that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just Darius. It's very odd. I'm so glad
Yep.
that we're diving into this right here because Elliot Friedman also said the biggest win for Chris Drury this offseason has been there's no drama, which is great. When you don't want to be a circus
Yes.
franchise, especially being here in New York where the media is so loud, it's easy to have the portrayal of being a circus. We've seen it with other teams in the sports town. We've seen it with the Jets. We've seen it with the Knicks. We've seen it with plenty of teams here and how the media could, things could spiral out of control. And they did last year. And, you have to ask yourself, how did the Rangers go from a President's Award winning trophy team, 2 wins away from a Stanley Cup, to as bad and abysmal as they were last year? I mean, they still had Igor. They still had Panarin. They still had Mika, Kreider, guys like this. They still had this. They brought in JT Miller, who they didn't have on that team, on that President's team. So, it just goes to show you the type of disarray that the Rangers were going through last season. And that's why Friedman emphasized that on his podcast, saying that the lack of drama has been even better. We could talk about, which we will on the stream. We'll talk about Gavrikov. We'll talk about Scott Morrow. We'll talk about Malcolm Spence, guys like this. But Chris Drury learning from his mistake of last offseason. Like I said, he doesn't need to go to every player, tell him exactly what he's doing. He's the general manager. He gets paid the big bucks. He doesn't have to consult with each player.
Yep.
But it's just been nice to see that there's no drama. But this situation is really weird, Darius. This seems like there's a little smoke, could turn into fire. It's almost like Chris Drury feels obligated, feels forced to make things work with Mika because Mika hasn't indicated he wants to leave. He bought a new house in New York City. He seems to love it here. He's been a Ranger for a long time, maybe some unfinished business, but there's some smoke here, Darius, and we'll see what it turns into because if the Rangers were to force Mika out, then a guy like Jordan Kyrou could all of a sudden become available.
It makes a lot of sense, at least in terms of salary cap, right? And you would still have some money left over. It could make some sense. But I am getting the vibe, and again, no insight. I don't have any insider information into this specific situation, but I am getting the vibe that, Mika basically said, I'm not leaving. I want to be a New York Ranger. I like it here, and it's in my contract. And Chris Drury has learned from his mistakes, and instead of putting it out there or leaking it that they want to trade him, remove him, he's keeping it quiet, and he's trying to work with the player on either, listen, is there anything we can do in terms of a trade? Is there any team that you would be open to going to? If the answer is no, can you play the wing? We need you to play the wing. We cannot have you making $8.5 million behind JT Miller making $8 million on the third line. It makes no sense for this team. We need you to play the wing. And if you're playing the wing, we got to figure out a couple other things because we don't have a third line center or a natural third line center. And then where are the kids playing? One guy who's not even pictured here, Brendan Othman. Where is that guy going to play this year? Is it in the AHL? Sure, but you know what I mean? Like, you got to start figuring some things out. So it's going to be very interesting, and they have to have that conversation at least. So that's kind of the vibe I'm getting. He just doesn't want to repeat some of the same mistakes that he made last season, like when he leaked to the media, which is what happened, right? Like in November, that Chris Kreider and obviously Jacob Trouba were on the block. He was trying to shake things up and make guys uncomfortable, but he went about that the wrong way. I can appreciate what he was trying to do, but he clearly went about that the wrong way, and it really destroyed the room for that season. So clearly, and it really started at the draft when a lot of that came out from Larry Brooks about Jacob Trouba and Detroit and him adding Detroit to his no movement clause or no trade clause, excuse me. So that's really where all of that came out. But, it was just a disastrous season for that reason. And I do want to touch on that because it does play into the Mika Zibanejad stuff as well. I do want to touch on Shesterkin as well because you had some interesting stats on that, Bret. But Vince Mercogliano came out and said, with the K'Andre Miller trade, K'Andre Miller's agent came out and said that he really, is happy about the way that Chris Drury went about this, the fact that it was pretty quiet, and it really was, right? We had an idea of what was going to happen and what the Rangers were planning, but it was very quiet in terms of if you compare it, the contrast of, again, the Chris Kreider and the Jacob Trouba stuff, it was very quiet. So, K'Andre Miller's agent was very happy about that, and it seems like Chris Drury is learning from his mistakes, which is okay. We all make mistakes, and we got to learn from them, right? It does look like he's putting his best foot forward. He has made some moves that I'm a big fan of this offseason. He's conducting himself a little bit better. I don't think still, no matter who you are, if you're the captain of the team, assistant captain, I don't care, the leadership team, guys who are on the fourth line, he doesn't have to tell you anything. He can if he wants to, right? But he really doesn't have to. He's the general manager, right? But it sounds like he's at least communicating with his players a little bit better based on exactly what he wants to share with them, which I think is good. So how do you feel about that? I feel like that's a big thing going forward, that he can, build a little bit more trust with some of the younger players too, where you don't get a situation where, Chris Kreider essentially, and most of the other guys, like we heard about that meeting at Panarin's house, quit on the team.
Yeah, well, I don't blame the agent for being surprised because if we look at the track record with Chris Drury, if we look at recency bias, just last year, you're dealing with guys that have more rep than K'Andre Miller, to be honest with you. Guys like Chris Kreider, guys like Barclay Goodrow, Jacob Trouba. I mean, these guys have been Rangers forever. These guys have a lot, Chris Kreider, there are Rangers fans that believe his jersey should be in the rafters one day, So as K'Andre Miller's agent, I'm sure he was worried. And you saw right there, he was surprised. And I'm sure that he was, because you don't want to mess with your, as an agent, you don't want to mess with your players' money. You don't want to mess with that type of stuff, where he could go, where he could get traded. So you would like it to be, with no drama, as quiet as possible, under the radar. And luckily for K'Andre Miller, it went smooth. He ended up on a team that's going to be a contender in the Eastern Conference. He ended up with a huge contract. I still can't believe that
Yep.
he's making more money than Gavrikov. I actually made a mistake in one video where, I said that the Rangers would have gotten a first and a third round pick, and they actually would have gotten a bit more because I actually cannot believe how much money Carolina gave to him. Little less than Provorov, but more than Gavrikov, who is a proven commodity, a defensive stopper. And look, the Rangers, it's definitely not a bad thing. I'm not gonna like celebrate that Chris Drury is not creating any chaos here this offseason. But I will say it's good to see that we have a general manager that noticed he made a mistake last season.
Yep.
He learned from it. He's had a good offseason. I've been hard on Chris Drury, but if we look at these moves, if we look at the value that he's gotten on certain guys, if we look at the return that he got for a Keandre Miller, I mean, it's been nothing short of tremendous. So I like what I see from Chris Drury this offseason. Sometimes it takes, Darius, sometimes it takes slip-ups like that or bad moments to really make you reevaluate and change your vibe, change the way you present yourself. So it's good to see Chris Drury learn from that, and it's paid off well for the Rangers so far this offseason. Still work to do.
Absolutely. And even at the time that happened, I was saying that, Chris Drury probably made a mistake, but at the same time, the players have to, tie their boots and get to work kind of thing. Like, you can't just quit on the team, especially if you're still on the team. But it's nice to see that he's learning from that. And again, I will maintain that he doesn't have to share everything with the players. You don't have to go into the dressing room and announce every single trade that you're doing or what you're planning on doing. But I'm glad that he's at least, it sounds like he's communicating a little bit better and probably not leaking as much, because it did seem like it was coming from literally him. So that's at least what it looked like last offseason. We do have a question from Khadiza. I do want to get into this and a couple other questions as well, because there's one that I think is going to spark a very interesting debate in the chat and amongst the both of us. So we'll get to that in a second. But Khadiza did ask, what positions do the Rangers still need to fill? And I'll bring up the lineup. We can kind of talk about it as we look at the lineup here. I have a pretty clear idea of personally that they need to add on defense, I think, at least in terms of depth, and they should actually move. I do not understand the fascination with Carson Soucy and hanging on to that player to hope and pray that his value goes up. I don't like, he has to play for it to go up, and I don't think it's going to go up by watching him play. So I'll tell you that. So I don't know the fascination with keeping him. I do think they need to add on D. I really like what they did in terms of the forward depth, the forwards that they signed, that they kept, and what they signed them for. Like, Cooley's contract is unbelievable. Zibanejad has to play the wing, of course, but I do think it's still at D. And if Zibanejad is playing the wing, maybe a third line center. I don't know if you can find that internally, but that's kind of what I'm looking at. But what are you seeing, Bret?
What I'm seeing is, a defense that was really lackluster heading into the offseason. Like I said, Chris Drury did an excellent job getting Gavrikov, with the value that he got him at, considering what the market dictated. Great job by Chris Drury. Not only that, another check, bringing in Scott Morrow, who I am a big fan of this player. The more I do my research on Scott Morrow, I am really fascinated by this player. And the fact that we were able to get him back in that Keandre Miller trade is just another W for Chris Drury, another check, another box that was checked. So the defense, is it perfect? It's not perfect, but is it much better than what it was to start the offseason? Absolutely. You mentioned the depth. We brought in some nice depth, the Taylor Radishes of the world, the Brissons of the world, which we'll get into. Guys like that, not superstars, but players that, teams that want to compete need on their roster. But I'm looking at third line center, Darius. I'm looking at third line center. If the Rangers want to optimize this season, it's with Mika on the right wing. I mean, we can't say it enough. The stats back it up. If you watch hockey, know anything about hockey, the eye test will tell you Mika just looked better. He looked better with JT Miller. That combo was dynamic. That's a combo I'd like to see more this season. But third line center, they definitely need help because right now it looks okay. It looks like they got a ton of depth. With Trocheck, Miller, Mika, you're probably saying, wow, that's the best, center depth in the league. But, in order to best optimize this team, you move Mika to right wing, and you need to do something at third line center. I'm glad you brought up the fascination with Carson Soucy because, this is a player, I get it. You gave up a lot for him, Chris Drury, but that was you. That was on you. You got to get out of that mistake sooner rather than later before it's too late. I know his value is low. He's coming off his worst season in the NHL, and I know what Chris Drury's thinking. He's thinking this year's an outlier. If you look at the stats, he's been a good player over the years. That's why we traded for him, right? That's why we gave up the third round pick. But no, the guy hit age 30. He looked a step slow. He looked less physical. He was a no-show, non-competitive, just the absolute dud on the offensive end. 6'5", 200 something pounds. He doesn't play like it. He plays. I mean, Zach Jones plays tougher than Carson Soucy did this past year for the Rangers. So, they got to do something there. But if not, we do have an in-house option, Darius. I'm going to bring it up right now. We've spoken about it as of late. Johnny Brzezinski, that's the guy I'm going with.
Yeah.
I know you hear the name, guys, and you're not overwhelmed. You're not all excited like a Jordan Kyrou, acquisition. But this is the move. You put Johnny Brzezinski at third line center. I'm curious to hear what you think about that, because that's what I would do.
Yeah, I think that he can play center. He was obviously playing wing last year. I do want to say he's not even, listed here because obviously they signed Taylor Radish and a couple other guys, and Berard is a natural left wing. So Brzezinski's not even listed here. Another guy who's not listed here is Juuso Parssinen, who they re-signed to play third line center, I believe. And I think Chris Drury has, again, another fascination with that player. He barely played after they traded for him. They signed him to $1.25 million, I believe. Don't really understand that move because I haven't seen enough of him personally, but maybe it does work out. But I love Brzezinski. I think he, from January on, was electric. Such a good player, and he was a big reason why the line, whatever line he ended up playing on, because it switched so often down the stretch, was successful. He was driving play. He scored a couple big goals, really big goals, especially, looking back, hindsight 2020, they weren't really close to making the playoffs, especially with some of those performances. But in the moment when you're watching the games and you're like, man, they're 2 points back or they can tie for the playoff spot tonight, he scored some huge goals. So he's not the youngest guy, but I feel like, just having him in the lineup, we talked about it in a video yesterday where, some of the younger guys really, really look up to him because he was an older guy on Hartford when guys like Brendan Othman were coming up, like Brett Berard are coming, just, joining the team. So he's one of those guys that keeps a lot of guys in their happy place. So, you don't have to have him on the team, even if he wasn't skilled, just for that reason. Of course, I'm not saying that, but he was playing solid. So I like that idea. I do think that he can play center. Obviously, I think he's better on the wing, but they filled out the wings pretty nicely, I think, so far through free agency. So I don't really mind that at all. I think that that could be a good move. And again, I feel like the lines are going to look much different than when you're looking at right here on day one. But the one other thing I wanted to bring up, because a couple people in the chat are saying, who should be traded next? That's from Rangers Man 94, and there's a couple other questions I want to get to too, including who should be the next captain from Rangers Man 94 as well. But
that's great question.
Great. Very big debate amongst Rangers fans with that right now, and I have a clear answer personally. But who should be traded next? I mean, obviously to me, it's Carson Soucy. I mean, you got to. We do, pump Drury's tires from time to time on the channel because he does make a lot of really good moves. I honestly do believe that, and he's a little bit cutthroat, and I think sometimes you got to be like that in the league to win. But you got to cut your losses. That was a bad move by Chris Drury. I'm looking into the camera right now. That was a terrible move, and he shouldn't have done that. And I thought at the time maybe there was some use on the roster last season. With the current makeup of the team, cut your losses, man. Get free of that salary cap, add a sweetener to it, whatever you need to do, cut your losses. I think that's the next move. And if it's not that, I think you got to talk about Mika Zibanejad, but that one's a little bit tougher, I think.
Yeah, and before we get into that, I don't know if you hear this, but I got my phone. I'm just getting text messages from Elliot Friedman, Frank Saravelli, Larry Brooks, Emily Kaplan. It's crazy. I don't know if I have my phone on mute, all this stuff on mute, but on my computer, do you hear it coming in on the computer or you don't hear it?
I don't hear it. Is there something happening? Do we have some breaking news?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Vince took care of us this afternoon when he heard we were live streaming at 5. But I got to tell Friedman, I know his podcast is over, but he's got to find something else to do here. I've been not bothered blowing up my phone. But look, in terms of who we're going to trade, that was the question, right? Who is the next guy out?
The next move. What's the next move they're going to make? Yep.
Well, I mean, the obvious one, to agree with you is Carson Soucy. I'm going to try to think of, I'm going to try to think outside the box here of who else it could possibly be. The only other name that I would mention that we actually haven't spoken about is maybe Will Borgen. And I know what you guys are thinking. It sounds outrageous. We we need defensive guys. We need depth, all that type of stuff. Now, before you guys come at me in the chat, I'm not, my first choice is obviously Susie. I'd love to trade Mika Zibanejad. You guys know that, but there are just, some guys on this team that we're handicapped with. We're stuck with these guys. But I look at a Will Borgen and I like the player. I like his toughness. I like his snarl, all that type of stuff, right? But this is a player that's coming off a really down year, in my opinion. I didn't like what I saw from him consistently this past year. It's a player making $4 million. I expect a bit more from Borgen. So that would be my to play devil's advocate here. That would be another option I'd have to entertain if I'm Chris Drury.
I think that's an interesting one because a lot of people, out there are talking. Personally, I love Will Borgen, what he brings to the lineup for his cap hit, especially with a lot of the contracts being handed out. So I really don't mind him. I think you need some of what he brings to the lineup. Can you find a better right side second pairing guy? Yeah, maybe in Braden Schneider, right, who's literally on this team, who would take that spot if Borgen was traded. So that's an interesting idea, but I do like what he brings to the team. I want to see what he does in a full season with the Rangers. So it's an interesting idea, and I think that anyone's on the table, right? There's only like a very small handful of untouchables on this team that include like Will Cooley, I think, Gabe Perreault for the time being. Lafreniere, I feel like, is not in that list, right? Maybe JT Miller is probably an untouchable at this point, but very small list of untouchables on this team. I do want to get into this before it kind of gets buried because I want to get to a bunch of other questions people are asking, but this is a crazy debate. I don't even think it's a long one for me on my end personally, but who should be the next captain? Because I do truly believe they're going to name a captain next season. I don't think they're going to go too long without it. I'm going to give my thoughts first because I do truly believe that he is the guy for it, and there's a reason they traded for him. This, make no mistake about it, Chris Drury is handing the reins of this team over to JT Miller. There's a reason that he traded for him. This is JT Miller's team. Like, make no mistake about it. Chris Kreider's gone now. Jacob Trouba's gone. This is a new era. When you traded out Chris Kreider, it signaled a new era. I know there's a lot of guys still here, like Mika Zibanejad, like Lafreniere, who's been here for a couple of years, right? I don't think he's really the captain type anyway. He has a different skill set. But he traded for JT Miller to become the captain of this team. There's that quote about last season. He came into the Vancouver Canucks season, and the reason that there was so much friction in the room is because guys like Pettersson and some other guys on the team weren't willing to lay it on the line to win a Stanley Cup. And JT Miller came into the season with that mindset that, hey, we're going to win a Stanley Cup, and that's why there was friction. And then, of course, he took a leave of absence because, they just weren't on the same wavelength. And I feel like he's going to come into this season with the same intensity. Will the Rangers win a Stanley Cup? I don't know if they have the roster to do it, but I think you need to at least have the mentality of, hey, we're going to all run through a brick wall together, and I'm the guy leading the way. And he just strikes me as that type. He's going to be wearing the C for this team. I think Trocheck is maybe a close second. But Bret, what are your thoughts on that? To me, it's JT Miller. He's the next captain. It's going to happen this year.
Darius, I agree with you. I don't want to waste any time there. 100% agree. And JT Miller, this is a guy that is his second act on Broadway, should we say?
That's right.
This is his second act on Broadway. And let's not forget the first time around, he was also a good player. It's not like he was here, one time he was a bum and came, this guy was good the first time. He came back. He's gotten even better and better over the years. This is a guy that's been an over 100 point per game player one season. He was a 99 point player, I believe, another year. So basically 200 point seasons there. I mean, the guy's got it all. He's got, that two-way ability that you love to see. He not only does he lead by example, which is what, Trocheck's a close second here. Trocheck is more of the lead by example guy. I like the way Trocheck stepped up last season when Trouba was traded, when Goodrow was traded, when the Rangers weren't playing up to their standards. It was good to see that side of Trocheck. But Miller is known for this. Miller is known for that fire. He doesn't fake it. We talk about it all the time. Like your boy Mitch Marner, we've spoken about it. That fake tough act. It's just not, like I said, it's almost like if Artemi Panarin started screaming and yelling at everybody. It'd be weird. It's not who he is. He's a great player, but that's not his DNA. That's not his true identity. That's JT Miller. JT Miller is going to fire you up. He's going to get in your face. He's like that quarterback that, like Tom Brady, that's going to grab you by the jersey and get in your face. That's what JT Miller does. And not only that, he backs it up on the ice. And that's the difference between him and Trouba. Trouba was that type of fiery guy, tough guy, big guy, all this type of stuff. But, the production wasn't, it wasn't the best, to put it nicely. When it comes to JT Miller, this is a guy that produces. This is a guy that shows up every night. And this is a guy that hates to lose. Not only that, this is a guy that's here for the next 5 years. That's what you need out of your captain. You don't want to put in some captain that's going to be here for 1 year and then bounce. You don't want that. And last year, everything about last year was weird. I thought it was weird having all these alternate captains and no captain. Just everything about last year was weird. Rangers need to establish that early. I'd like to see it soon. Get that. We got the coach, get the captain in order, and let's roll.
And I think they're going to. I honestly do. If I'm going to make a prediction for the season, we can talk about lineup all we want, and we're going to do that closer to the season. But he's going to be wearing the C when they do the player introductions first game at MSG this year. He will be wearing the C. There's no, obviously you trade for his skill as well, what he brings to a team. But they knew bringing him in, this is going to be the captain of our team. He's going to be, until his contract's up, he's going to be the guy. So again, like you mentioned, great two-way game. Just what he plays heavy. I remember when, back when they just traded for him, he obviously had that great game against the Bruins. The next game, I think at home, he's dumping the puck in, chasing and hitting guys. You're like, whoa, nobody else on this team is doing it. So he's leading by example that way. And I think that had a lot to do with Peter Laviolette as well. But anyway, he's dumping the puck and he's chasing and he's smashing guys. You love to see that stuff. So he's awesome. He's electric to watch. He can score 100 points. He can back check. He's physical. You could see it rubbing off on a guy like Will Cooley, who plays very similarly to him. So he's the guy. He's the guy, in my opinion. We'll get to some comments as we go along here as well. But I did want to get into another question because you guys are throwing in a bunch of them. I also, from Rangers Nation 11, I am very interested and excited to see Dylan Roberick. I believe that's how it's pronounced. He used to play for the Niagara Ice Dogs in the OHL in the preseason at center. He's a big body. I'm very excited to see what he can do. Heading into next season, probably with the Hartford Wolfpack, and then we'll kind of go from there. How do you guys, I thought this was very interesting. How do you guys feel about our goalie depth? At the trade deadline, could we let Quick go to a contender? And who comes up? Is it Garand? So first of all, quick thoughts on that. Goaltending depth, I love that they re-signed Quick because he's great in the backup position, but you only have him for 1 year. I think Garand is the guy. He's going to be the backup goalie. Of course, Shesterkin is your guy, number one starting goaltender. But I think it's Garand who's going to come up. I think that's fine. But I do think you do take a look. If you're in the playoffs, you don't trade Quick. Ride it out. Let him retire a New York Ranger. I think that's fine. Could you get value from? Maybe. But if you're in the playoffs, ride it out because you never really know what happens. But if you're out of the playoffs, which I don't think will happen, I do think you at least take a look at that. But to me, Garand is the guy coming up.
Yeah, I mean, Garand is the guy, but you can't go wrong with Jonathan Quick, the way that he's played, the way he's conducted himself here as a Ranger, the way that he's produced here as a Ranger. I mean, if he plays the way he did the 2023-2024 season, the Rangers are going to be in really great shape because I do believe a big bounce back from Igor Shesterkin. Will we see, the 21-22 version of Igor when he won that Vezina was absolutely, on another planet.
Yep.
I believe we can see that. I really do. I mean, he's never had this type of defensive first pair in front of him. The defense is, like I said, the Scott Morrows of the world, guys like that. I believe the defense is rounding out really nicely around Igor, but I do like Jonathan Quick here for another season, and I do believe we're going to see the version of Quick we saw in 2023, 2024 than we saw last year. Like I said, everything was weird last year. Everybody took a step back last year. I believe this year it's going to be a bounce back for not only Jonathan Quick, not only Igor Shesterkin, but a lot of players. Mika Zibanejad, Alexei Lafreniere. So the list goes on and on. I expect a big bounce back from the Rangers this season.
Yeah, and I think there are some games, if you look back at last season specifically, you bring up a good point that, you look at Shesterkin, you look at Quick, there's a couple games where you're like, man, they were not good. But there's a couple games where you're like, they're the only reason the Rangers won that game. And I can remember a game against Detroit for Quick. I believe there was one against Ottawa for Shesterkin where you're like, they are the only reason the Rangers won this game. So it was just a weird season. I feel like with the defense being certainly better, it is heading into next season in all areas. Could it be better? Maybe, but I think it's better than last season, that's for sure. That's going to help them too because I feel like both goaltenders were second guessing every play because the defense was just horrific. Not just the two guys who are out there at any given moment, but the team defense, which is something I talked a lot about last season. The center just was never in the right position. It was just awful. Mika Zibanejad, I don't think he can play center defensively anymore. That's another thing. Despite, playing with JT Miller and that he looks better there, you just can't play center defensively. So that's a whole nother thing. But I think the goaltending will be a lot better next season. Now, Jeffrey brings this up. Would you do Lafreniere for Bowen Byram? There's a lot of talk about Bowen Byram right now. I think he's going to make a lot of money. Obviously, the Buffalo Sabres filed for salary arbitration, so an offer sheet is off the table. Not that I think the Rangers would have done that anyway, but it would have to be a trade at this point in time. I feel like he's going to get paid. I also feel like he is open to staying in Buffalo, but it could make some sense. But I feel like if you do trade Laff, and it's going to sound weird to say this, you do need offense, right? You get Byram. He's a great player. Will play the left side, but you're sacrificing a lot of offense there. So, you would have to go out and get another forward. So, how do you feel about that one?
Well, it's a good question from Jeffrey, and thank you for that. But, if I'm looking at if I'm going to sit here and say that the Rangers need to get better at right wing, they need to get more scoring punch at right wing, trading Alexei Lafreniere doesn't help. I understand, last year was a bad year for him. He got the big contract, started off great, got the big contract, and, that's on Chris Drury.
Yep.
After he got that big contract, you saw the dip. It was very noticeable. Can't deny it. But Lafreniere came out of the gates, and you were like, "Whoa! Like this guy's in for a monster season." But wasn't in for a monster season. He was in for a monster payday. But look, am I saying that you can't trade? You can't trade him just because you drafted him number 1 overall in 2020, or you can't trade him because you just paid him last year. I'm not saying that. I've said that you can trade Alexei Lafreniere in the right deal. The JJ Peterkas of the world, guys like that who are obviously not available anymore. The Jason Robertsons of the world, guys like that. And especially Lafreniere, let's not forget that he is entering year 3. No, he's entering year 2 of the contract, so you would still be able to trade him without that no trade clause kicking in, because year 3, so if you were ever going to trade Lafreniere, you probably do it now. Yep. In the right deal, because year 3, that no trade clause activates. So, but for Bo Byram, I don't do it. I like Bo Byram. I've said the Rangers should trade for Bo Byram. He's been on the rise the last few years. He's got great potential, but I'm not doing it for Alexei Lafreniere. I'm just not. That's not the player I would do it for.
I think Bo Byram makes a lot of sense on this team if they made that trade, or that move at least, whether it's an offer sheet or trade, before July 1st. If that happened, like if they pulled the trigger before, then it could make some sense. But like you said, for Lafreniere, it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm going to maintain that I think the ship on trading Lafreniere this offseason has sailed. The right deal could still pop up, but a lot of really good options like Peterka, I would have done that, have sailed, I think. So I think now is the time to just get him back to feeling good, comfortable, and see what he can do next season. And hopefully it's a bounce back, because boy, oh boy, that 7.4 is looking tough if he has a similar season to last year. I did want to bring this up because we were just talking about goaltending, and Bret, you sent this over to me earlier today. For those New York Rangers fans saying that Igor Shesterkin is overpaid, which so many of those, by the way, earlier last season, I saw them, and I saw you guys in the comments. I don't know if you're in here specifically, but I saw you guys in the comments talking about Shesterkin last year when I was saying he's the best goalie in the league. But let's look at the Florida Panthers' last 8 playoff series and the opposing team's goals against average and save percentage. Look at Igor Shesterkin there, right in the middle or close to the middle. By far and away, the best save percentage. I mean, the Florida Panthers were absolutely shelling other teams, not just this year, but last year on their quest for their back-to-back Stanley Cups. Igor is that guy. I think he's the best goaltender in the NHL. Look what just happened to Connor Hellebuck, by the way, in the playoffs. Like, Shesterkin is still the same guy in the playoffs. He's the best goalie in the league to me. So I think he's going to bounce back. And even then, he didn't have a terrible year. It's just some games you're like, oh boy, what's he doing? But I think the reason he was doing some of that and letting in some bad goals is because, again, he had no idea what the defense in front of him was doing. So the structure was absolutely horrible last year. How do you feel about Igor Shesterkin? His payday's kicking in, right? We know that he's making a lot of money, but I think it's for good reason. This guy is, without a doubt to me, the best goalie in the league.
Well, Igor is the only goaltender that can get you past the Florida Panthers, in my opinion. Like I said, I believe the East is open. I understand. I respect Florida immensely. I understand they're the standard back-to-back champions. But Igor is the only guy that gives you a chance. We talk about Connor Hellebuck. He's the regular season merchant in terms of goaltending. I have a lot of respect for him, but it's almost equivalent to the Carolina Hurricanes, the regular season merchant team in the NHL. They look absolutely unstoppable during the regular season, and they always fall short. They never quite make it to the Stanley Cup, let alone win the Stanley Cup. So Igor gives you the best chance, in my opinion. And Look, I have tremendous respect for Andrei Vasilevsky, but how has he looked against the Florida Panthers?
Not great.
Right? How Vasilevsky look? I know how he's looked against the Rangers, but how's he looked against the Panthers, guys? Not great. He's looked like a shell of himself when he faces Florida. So Igor is that guy. I mean, if you get anything close to the 2021-2022 version with this improved defense, hopefully a little bit more scoring punch coming in here, Mike Sullivan as the head coach, anything's possible.
Yeah.
I really believe the East is open and that the Rangers can make some noise.
I think the Rangers, I'm expecting them. My expectation next season is that they will make the playoffs. Where? I don't know. It could be the eighth seed. I expect them to make the playoffs next season. I think they're going to have that mentality. The mindset is going to shift a little bit. And you can see here from advanced analytics, like they're poised to have a much better season. I mean, it would be hard. Like, because at times last season it did look like it was on purpose that they were losing. Some of the players were tanking things, but it would be hard to have a worse season than last year with some of the talent on this team. I do truly believe that. So I think they're going to be a better team. I think they're going to make the playoffs. But Bret, we got to get out of here. But before we do that, I do have one last thing I wanted to touch on because I covered it in a video earlier today, and I want your thoughts on it. I'm curious, and I want everyone in the chat's thoughts on this too, because it seems like there's two different camps right now. Everyone's split right now. Is Adam Fox washed, or is he still an elite defenseman in the league? And I made a video on this earlier. I cannot believe people think that he's washed, that he's a bad defenseman. I actually think he's way better defensively than people even give him credit for. I went into all the advanced analytics in that video, if you want to go check that out. Now that you're adding Gavrikov to that pairing, I honestly believe it might be one of the best dynamic defensive pairings in the entire league. How do you feel about Adam Fox heading into this year? Is he the same player that, he was a couple years ago or when he first, broke into the NHL? Maybe not, but he's still an elite defenseman in my eyes, and he's top 5 in a lot of different categories amongst NHL defensemen.
I mean, the guy's still elite. The guy's top 5. The guy, has he been the same since his injury? No. But the statistics back it up. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to listen to you. You go take a look at the statistics. You'll see it for yourself. Adam Fox is still top 5. I'll give you Cale Makar. I'll give you Hughes. I'm not going to go crazy here. I'm not going to say he's the best defenseman in the world, but to say he's not still top 5, show me the other players that are convincingly better defensemen than Adam Fox. You can't find them. You really can't find them. Even off a bad year last year, it was a complete disaster last year, guys. Yet Adam Fox still scored over 60 points. Adam Fox still brought that offensive upside that you love from him as a defenseman. Now he'll have that defensive stopper on the left side, a better version of Ryan Lindgren when Adam Fox was at his best. Paired with a guy like Ryan Lindgren, Gavrikov is bigger, Gavrikov is better, Gavrikov is poised, he's great on the penalty kill. Fox, as that quarterback on the power play, still got a lot of the same elements that you've had when the Rangers have had success with their special teams. I mean, Adam Fox is still elite. There's no other way to slice it. +9 this season. It seemed like everybody was a minus, except for like Will Cooley and guys like that. Everybody was a minus. Yep. Everybody was a dud. Not Adam Fox. +9, over 60 points once again. I expect him to be even better this season. He'll get back. You could book this right now. He'll be back to 70 points this season with Gavrikov on the left side.
Absolutely, and you bring up a good point that I brought up in the video as well, that he was, first of all, a plus player on this team last year, which is almost impossible to do. And keep in mind that, plus minus doesn't count for special teams, right? So that's 5-on-5 play, that he was still a plus player. And not only that, take a look at this, what I have on screen right now, too. I brought this up in the video, too. That since 21-22, in the league amongst defensemen, 50 goals, 9th. 230 assists, 3rd. 280 points, 3rd. Plus minus, +76, 3rd. Amongst all defensemen, keep that in mind, in the league. Number 1 in takeaways. Everyone thinks of him as an offensive guy, and that's all he can do, and he gets the puck in his spots, all that stuff. No. First in takeaways since 21-22. 14 game-winning goals, 484 block shots. He's 8th amongst all defensemen in block shots. I think that's incredible as well. And obviously, 4 straight top 5 Norris finishes. Get that whole narrative that he is washed out of here. He is not. And not only that, taking all these stats, and this is since the 21-22 season up until even last year, now you're adding Gavrikov beside him. He's just going to be that much better. I'm very excited to see what he's going to be doing next season. And again, I feel like I can't remember who it was, but somebody on social media said that Ryan Lindgren and Keandre Miller should be paying royalties to Adam Fox for the contracts that they got this offseason. So he's an unbelievable player. But before we wrap up here, Bret, any final thoughts? Lots going on right now. We're gonna have tons more content for you guys throughout the week, but a lot going on with the Rangers.
Yeah, final thoughts is today was another sizzling stream. We got more of them coming. The weekly Wednesday live streams, we call them, every Wednesday. Slow point in the off season, but we're still going to be pumping out daily content for you guys, whether it's Darius, myself, the both of us, whatever it may be. You'll have something to watch every day, so make sure you tune into that. And also, like I said, the live streams. We're going to be here every Wednesday. We are on X, guys. We got social media going at Rangers Digest YT. As Darius likes to say, the conversation continues over there. And not only that, but I think it'd be a good idea, Darius, to kind of, hear from some of you guys. What do you guys want to hear on the live stream? We're very active over there on X. We'll have some conversations with you guys. We'll be engaging. So just leave some comments in the chat. Leave some comments on X, what you guys want to hear us talk about in these streams, because they are packed every Wednesday, and we have a ton of fun doing them.
Absolutely. They're a ton of fun. We love taking everyone's questions and obviously chatting it up, chopping it up with all you guys. It's a lot of fun. But like Bret said, the conversation continues on X. So if you want to jump into something there, shoot us a message on you can find the link in the description, of course, the pinned comment as well. So check it out there. But I think we'll wrap it up there. Lots going on with the Rangers. We're going to have videos tomorrow on all, there's some new stuff that came out about Chris Drury and the way he's handling things. So we're going to deep dive into that a little bit more. Should be a lot of fun. But thank you everyone for tuning in today. Absolute pleasure as always. And we'll see you guys next week. Like Bret said, probably every Wednesday now for live streams until the season starts. And it's coming faster than I think we all realize at this point.
Wolves in the garden.